Okay, hi everyone. So I think there's probably, it was my slight concern, as it often is, as a literature scholar appearing at a non-literature social sciences conference, that there's, where's the traction between our different areas of work? But I think there's in fact quite a lot of traction between our papers certainly on this panel. What I talk about implicitly anyway is how the literary imagination, or our work as readers of imaginative texts, how that creates porosity across city divisions, city boundaries. And then I suppose in relation to Gillian's paper that we just heard, I'm interested in how literature might be seen as a technology of the urban imagination, of urban imaginaries. The work that I'm speaking to today comes out of a project that I have been involved with for a number of years. It has had several incarnations, basically several sort of generations of funding. The project is called Planned Violence, Post-Colonial Urban Infrastructures and Literature. We were based in 5 different institutions across 3 continents, Oxford, London, Delhi and Johannesburg. And what we were interested in doing through a series of workshops, which have now come to an end, and we're now putting together the essay collection rising out of those workshops. What we were all interested in doing was looking at how reading, the imaginative reception, stimulated, generated and guided by reading, and also by other works of art, including film, how that allows us to move through the city, to interrogate its boundaries, to create a kind of porosity. So we were interested, and in my work, or my contribution to the project in particular, we were interested in how literature imagines the city, if you like, image maps the city, allows us to imagine our own cities, to create new possibilities, different ways of inhabiting the city, in particular strongly divided cities. And what I'd like to do in the time that I have is to pick up on a number of examples, literary examples, and then to talk a little bit about how we might theorize these examples, or how these particular literatures might contribute to imagining, image mapping the city. So I'd like to begin by drawing our attention to Omar Robert Hamilton's "The City Always Wins." And here's a quote from that work. It is set during the 2011 uprising around Tahrir Square in Cairo. Cairo is all jazz, all contrapuntal influence jostling for attention, occasionally brilliant solos standing high above the steady rhythm of the street. These streets laid out to echo the order and ratio and martial management of the modern city, now moulded by the tireless rhythms of salesmen and walkers and car horns and gas peddlers, all out in the ownership of their city, mixing pasts with their presents, birthing a new now of south and north, young and old, country and city, all combining and coming out loud and brash, and with a beauty incomprehensible. Yes, Cairo is jazz. Now you might notice how that short extract that I read there, and the narrative very much continues in that mode. You may notice how the words, the lines, weave a jazz rhythm across city space, mimicking something of the spontaneous effects and outbursts of energy of everyday life as they play out over the underlying urban infrastructures that, quote from the piece, order and ratio and marshal city space. Frantz Fanon, we remember, described in his account of the colonial city a world divided into compartments that relies on lines of force that bring violence into the home and into the mind of the native. So according to Fanon, where urban planning in Algiers, as in Cairo and other colonial cities of that time, the 1950s, was a violent materialization of colonialism's exploitative project. It was a planned violence. But then notice against this, against those lines of force that Fanon described, how Robert Omar Hamilton points to countervailing aspects, reimaginings beyond, through, and with, utilizing those lines of force, but also going beyond them, exploding them through the interventions of ordinary people, through activating the tireless rhythms of salesmen and hawkers and car horns and gas peddlers, all out in their ownership of the city. What this mobilizes, I think, and this is something that our project closely investigated, is how people and community interactions can become a kind of informal urban infrastructure, reminding us of Abu Malik Simone's notion of people as infrastructure. Residents, or indeed citizens, all of whom have imagination, who interact with cultural products, including literary writing, including artworks, can enact through those artworks, through their imaginative engagement with them, a repossession of urban space. I was very interested in what we were hearing there about the community center in the favela in Rio. So enact a repossession of urban space, or what Lefebvre would describe as a right to the city. These rights can be claimed through imaginative work, through the kinetic, oral, and visual occupation of urban space. The writer, the artist, exercises a shaping power over processes of urbanization, insisting upon a participatory role in the ways in which our cities are made and imaginatively remade. It is in this imaginative occupation, engagement with urban space, or what Judith Butler calls bodies in alliance, that the imaginative reconfiguration of urban spaces and modes of city living can be regenerated. And I believe that literary writing plays an important role in this reconfiguration. Indeed, I'd want to claim, and we will do so in the book that I already referred to, that will be called Planned Violence, I'd want to claim that literary structures can set up a powerful counterpoint to the planned violence of the city, an imaginative and imaginary counterpoint. So to give you a few more examples, this one not particularly concerned as the Hamilton novel was with revolutionary urban movements, but concerned with neoliberal capital, the kind of the explosion of capital that Delhi has seen in recent years. Rana Dasgupta's Capital, 2014. It's a love-hate song to Delhi and its singular brand of modernity, ribald, brutal, cacophonous, exhilarating. He too, or this text too, similarly represents the city as a place of embedded inequalities through its non-fictional yet literary form. For Dasgupta and Capital, the city's divisions and layerings are cross-hatched. Again, there's this sort of these tropes, these metaphors of cross-hatching, as in the Hamilton. The city's divisions are cross-hatched, made porous, if you like, with a globalized mass culture born of post-colonial conflict. In the case of this work, the 1947 partition. But meanwhile, interstitial subcultures work to re-elaborate and reconstruct streets, markets, and other spaces in ways that involve the city dwellers themselves. So in the book, in this memoir stroke travelogue through Delhi, Dasgupta is constantly interacting with the city dwellers themselves, asking them what they think about inhabiting the city space. Imitating Rana Dasgupta's own movement through the city, his narrative's mostly untitled chapters rocket the reader through a series of formative post-1991 Delhi experiences, from outsourcing and Americanization to corruption and the accumulation of waste. Chapters that dwell on formative moments in the city's history are themselves threaded through with the author's conversations with prototypical Delhiites, engaging varyingly a spectrum of violent, corrupt, and activist projects. By interspersing his movement through and stoppages in Delhi's clogged motorway system with the individual stories of his interviewees, Dasgupta's own writing sets about remapping the city's chaotic street infrastructure, while at the same time plotting intrepid individual routes through it and spaces within it, as indeed does, interestingly, Arundhati Roy's most recent novel, 2017, The Ministry of Utmost Happiness. For those of you who may know this novel, you will remember that the Hijra Anjum's home in New Delhi is in a graveyard. What she does is to go to the one place in the city that is free of those lines of restrictive force that Fanon was talking about, namely the graveyard. And here she creates a kind of village, an alternative community. She opens up perhaps the most unpromising of city spaces, the graveyard, the most dead, literally, and she makes of it a living, thriving, and interactive place. And what the novel does is it keeps returning us to that space. It's the space where the various waifs and strays, who are the main characters, come together, accumulate over time, and not only human waifs and strays, but also animals. Just a very quick extract. Between Zainab and Saddam, they had turned the graveyard into a zoo, a Noah's Ark of injured animals. There was a young peacock who could not fly, and a peahen, perhaps his mother, who would not leave him. There were 3 old cows that slept all day. Zainab arrived one day in an auto rickshaw with several cages stuffed with 3 dozen budgies that had been absurdly coloured in luminous dyes. She had bought them in a fit of anger from a bird seller who had the cages stacked on the back of his bicycle, and so on. So the lines of flight, or the walking lines of these animals, these waifs and strays, and the human characters create a very interesting, fertile, imaginative zone within the very heart of the novel, but also within the heart of Delhi that is being represented. Or to take yet another example again, going to a very different space, Aminata Forna's The Memory of Love, a novel about the 1990s civil war in Sierra Leone and its aftermath, recalls how the fearsome rebel army, the Revolutionary United Front, swept through the capital Freetown, targeting and destroying with overwhelming violence the infrastructure of city streets, bridges, and government buildings. In the novel, which is set in the war's aftermath, the city becomes, for the key characters like Kai, one of Forna's main protagonists, punctuated by painful no-go areas. The conflict lingers in these spaces, embedded in its subjective psychogeography. Yet, even while the novel charts these personal maps of urban trauma, at the same time the fast-moving prose explores other life-affirming through routes that the characters have managed to carve through the city in spite of and against this prevailing violence. Now, I have a number of other examples that I'm personally very excited about to demonstrate the ways in which these alternative lines of imaginative force are created through these writings and across the divided spaces of the city. A number of fantastic examples from Johannesburg also, which was one of the places that our project concentrated on. We've looked at Marko Visser's Dispatcher. We've looked at Ivan Vladislavich's Portrait with Keys. We've also looked at some London novels, including Harare North and Monica Ali's Brick Lane. But I'd just like to, in the interest of time, just skip to the end, just say something about, if you like, the technologies of this literature. I mean, how it does this imaginative work that I'm suggesting it does, how it retraces, renegotiates the spaces of the city. Because, of course, these works need to be read, to be mobilized. For these imaginaries to be mobilized, these works need to be read. So there is something quite crucial about the cognitive processes that are activated in the reader by these books, which in a longer version of this paper I would want to say more about. There's also an important way in which, for the reader, these works mobilize hope, mobilize a utopian imaginary, if you like. And just to kind of pinpoint that, a quote from the post-colonial critic Bill Ashcroft, when he talks about the utility of utopia in literature, which lies in the capacity of literature to imagine a different world. Whether there's any political instrumentality in utopian thinking is the same question as the one that arises in all arguments about the book or the barricade. Can literature change the world? Well, only if it is read, right? But when it is read, it is that interesting question, which perhaps we can talk about in the questions. When it is read, what is it about this writing that creates these alternative imaginaries? Perhaps it creates those less than smart, kind of do-it-yourself imaginaries that through which we can re-inhabit city space. And I think I'll leave it there. I have some further lines on utopian thinking, but I think I'd like to leave it there. I'll simply just read from Sarah Nuttall, who has written the afterword to the book Planned Violence, where she writes that the infrastructures of our places and our times are sites of violence, planned and unplanned, but also modes of reopening, of repair and reoccupation. In all these ways, these books, these literary writings, demand our attention and provide an occasion for rethinking. Thank you.